Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear viewers and listeners, Assalamu alaikum. In this monologue, I am going to discuss the specific best and worst deed in the sight of God, as highlighted in the glorious Koran for the guidance of heedful mankind. As a matter of fact, the glorious Koran is satiated with examples of good and bad deeds for the guidance of mankind. These deeds may be categorized as major or minor on the basis of consequences of each deed as mentioned in the Quran. However, it is not possible to rank all those deeds in absolute terms on the basis of any criteria that may be applicable to all human beings due to their peculiar circumstances. The actual ranking and consequences of such deeds in individual cases is only known to God, who has absolute knowledge about the intention and limitations of each human being. This is the essence of equity and fair dealing that would constitute the basis for administering justice on the Judgment Day. Nevertheless, the glorious Quran does provide clear commands about ranking of two specific deeds: one, the best deed, and second, the worst deed, where there can be no dispute between any human being who believes in the glorious Quran. This ranking and its associated consequence of best and worst deed is applicable to all human beings under all circumstances. Therefore, knowledge about the best and the worst deed is the essence of determining the success or failure of all human beings on the Judgment Day. There is a general tendency on the part of human beings to rank certain deeds on the basis of flimsy arguments that are not supported by the glorious Quran. For example, if someone is offering regular prayers, he will plead that offering prayer is the best deed in the sight of God. Normally, the priest class whose earning or income is dependent upon offering prayers in a place of worship would uphold such a claim on the basis of man-made traditions or stories. Similarly, if someone is employed in the armed forces or associated with a religious band that is waging their own self-styled war against other human beings, will plead that waging a holy war is the best deed in the sight of God. On the other hand, if someone generally avoids telling a lie, he will plead that telling a lie is the worst deed in the sight of God. On the basis of his personal quality, he will start condemning all those persons who tell a lie at some occasion. Similarly, if someone avoids abusing, he will plead that abusing someone is the worst deed in the sight of God. Due to such controversial statements passed by different people, majority of human beings remain confused about the ranking of specific best and worst deed in the sight of God. This confusion prevails due to the fact that majority of human beings find no time to study glorious Quran in a meaningful manner for guidance. Rather, they listen to the professional priests whose aim is to befool people for self-interest, or else they waste time on shoddy discussions on a social media. Whereas a true believer will only seek guidance from the glorious Quran in all matters of life. The glorious Quran highlights this fact in chapter 36, verse 11 in the following words: "You can warn only those who will follow the Quran and hold the Merciful One in reverence, though they cannot see Him. Give such people the glad news of forgiveness and a noble reward." This verse makes it clear that a truly guided person will only follow Quran and nothing else in all affairs of life. A question may arise in the mind that why knowledge about good and bad deeds is important. The answer is that since all human beings will be judged on the basis of their worldly actions, therefore the classification and division of all such actions into good deeds and bad deeds is essential for the guidance of mankind. This classification will be the basis for quantification of success or failure of an individual on the Judgment Day. This fact is explained in chapter 101, verses 6 to 9 in the following words. As for he whose scales are heavy, he will be in a pleasant life. But as for he whose scales are light, his home is the abyss. As already explained earlier, the glorious Quran is full of commands that may be used to distinguish between good and bad deeds and rank such deeds within each category in some manner. However, such a ranking may not be absolute due to limited vision of human beings. The purpose of relevant commands of glorious Quran is to guide the heedful mankind to avoid sins and adopt good deeds according to their individual circumstances. In this manner, every heedful person is expected to select the best course of action, that is, adopting certain good deeds and avoiding certain bad deeds according to his or her peculiar circumstances. The glorious Quran reaffirms this fact in chapter 29, verse 7 in the following words. We shall certainly blot out the misdeeds of those who believe and do good deeds, and we shall reward them according to the best of their actions. This verse proves the following important facts. 1. No human being can exclusively perform good deeds while avoiding all bad deeds due to limitations and attractions of worldly life. 2. Commission of good and bad deeds is an integral part of human life. 3. Every human being should make efforts to adopt the best course of action in all matters of life in the light of wisdom provided by the glorious Quran. 4. Finally, the merciful God will blot out sins of those individuals who believe in one God, believe on the Judgment Day, and strive to lead a pious life according to their unique circumstances. A question may come into the mind that is it possible to identify and rank the best and the worst deed from the wisdom provided by the glorious Quran? The answer of this question is in the affirmative. Let us explore how one can identify and rank the best and the worst deed from the glorious Quran. We need to understand that all our worldly actions carry either a positive or a negative impact in the sight of God. The positive and the negative actions have been ranked on the basis of their associated consequences in quantitative terms. This quantification is the essence of wisdom provided in the glorious Quran to guide heedful mankind for their salvation on the Judgment Day. A critical study of relevant verses of Quran tells us that all human deeds have been classified into 4 main groups in quantitative terms. Out of these 4 groups, 2 subgroups pertain to good deeds or virtues, while the other 2 pertain to bad deeds or sins. Within 2 subcategories of good deeds, one category earns multiple rewards ranging from double to a maximum of 10-fold reward, while the other category of good deeds earns 700 times reward. Similarly, within the 2 subcategories of bad deeds or sins, one category is unpardonable, and the other category counts as one sin for one wrong action. This category may also be pardonable at the discretion of God. In the light of this classification made by the glorious Quran, any human being of ordinary prudence can figure out that the best deed is the one that carries 700 times reward, and the worst deed is the one that is unpardonable. There is a long list of good deeds that have been highlighted in numerous verses of Quran. This list includes actions like offering prayers, observing fast, feeding the poor, honoring the pledge, being steadfast in a calamity, fighting for the cause of God, etc. For all such good deeds, the reward may range from multiple and up to 10 times. This fact is highlighted in the following two verses of Quran. Chapter 34, verse 37 reads, "Those who believe and do good deeds will have multiple rewards for what they have done." Similarly, chapter 6, verse 160 reads, "Whoever has done a good deed will have it 10 times to his credit." In the light of wisdom provided by these verses, it is clear that all good deeds will earn multiple and up to 10 times reward for each good action performed by a believer. This generous compensation for good deeds shows the extreme merciful nature of God, who bestows 10 times reward for one good deed so that maximum number of human beings may pass the test of life. The category of best deeds that earn a reward of 700 times is explained in the following verses of Quran. Chapter 2, verse 195 reads, "Spend in God's cause, do not contribute to your destruction with your own hands." Chapter 51, verse 19 reads, "Giving a rightful share of their wealth to the beggar and the deprived." Similarly, chapter 2, verse 261 reads, "Those who spend their wealth in God's cause are like grains of corn that produce 7 ears, each bearing 100 grains. God gives multiple increase to whoever He wishes. He is limitless and all-knowing." The analysis of these verses explicitly proves that spending a rightful share of one's wealth in God's cause is the most approved act in the sight of God. This most approved act or the best deed earns a reward of 700 times that is not reserved for any other good deed. Looking from a different perspective, if we compare the difference between the maximum reward of 10 times reserved for other good deeds with 700 times reward for spending wealth in God's cause, it transpires that spending wealth for the cause of God carries 70 times greater reward than any other good deed. So it is explicitly clear that spending wealth in God's cause is the best deed without any dispute. This is due to the fact that human beings possess greatest love for wealth, and it is the most difficult thing to spend wealth for God's cause. For example, chapter 102, verses 1, 2, and 6 to 8 read, "Striving for more distracts you until you go into your graves. You will most definitely see hellfire. You will see it with the eye of certainty. On that day, you will be asked about your pleasures." Similarly, chapter 104, verses 2 to 4 read, "Who amass riches and sedulously hoard them, thinking their treasures will make them live forever. No, indeed, he will be thrust into the crusher." These verses prove that human beings' greatest love is for wealth. All human beings strive to accumulate wealth in different forms, like land, cars, expensive furniture, extravagant personal belongings, and so on. This blind love for wealth distracts majority of human beings from love of God. Consequently, anyone who hoards wealth will be sent to the crusher in the hellfire for his love for wealth. But anyone who will spend a fair or rightful share of his wealth to please God will earn the greatest reward of 700 times. Think over it and analyze what may constitute rightful share of wealth. It is a relative term, and the best way to determine the size of fair portion is percentage of spending in God's cause vis-a-vis the size of wealth possessed by an individual. Should it be 5%, 10%, 20%, or even more? How many of us really spend a rightful portion of their wealth in God's cause to earn a reward of 700 times? A question may arise in mind: of people that since wealth can only be possessed by a rich person, therefore a poor person cannot earn 700 times reward by spending wealth or money in God's cause. However, it is a false notion in the light of wisdom provided by the glorious Quran. It is also a negation of God's equitable nature. For example, chapter 3 verse 134 reads, "Those who spend in prosperity and in adversity," while chapter 29 verse 7 reads, "We shall reward them according to the best of their actions." These verses clearly prove that spending wealth or money in God's cause is not reserved for people in prosperity alone. Even a person in adversity or poor circumstances can also spend money to please God to earn a reward of 700 times. God will reward each individual according to the best of his actions. A simple illustration will highlight this fact. Please refer to table 1. Suppose there are two individuals, Mr. A and B. Mr. A is a rich person whose total fortune is $1 million, while Mr. B is a poor person whose total fortune is $100 only. Assume that Mr. A spends $1,000 in God's cause, that is equal to 0.1% of his total wealth, while Mr. B spends $10 in God's cause, that is equal to 10% of his total wealth. This means that Mr. B, although a poor person, has spent 100 times more than Mr. A in relative terms. In this situation, Mr. A will earn a reward of 700 times for each dollar spent in God's cause. His total reward will be $70,000, that is measured by multiplying $1,000 spent in God's cause with 700 times reward. Mr. B will also earn a reward of $70,000, that is measured by multiplying $10 spent with 700 times reward and 100 times the relative size of Mr. B's spending. So the merciful God will take into account the relative size of spending made by both Mr. A and B to compensate them according to the best of their actions. In the light of wisdom provided by these two verses of glorious Quran, it is crystal clear that the noblest deed of spending in God's cause is reserved for every human being, the rich as well as the poor. The size of total reward for a believer will be measured in the light of the relative size of his spending vis-a-vis the size of his wealth on the basis of equity and fair dealing. These verses also make it clear that even a poorest person can earn such a big reward of 700 times by sharing one morsel of his bread with another hungry person. God is indeed extremely merciful towards mankind. Wealth can be spent in any manner to please God to earn 700 times reward. The glorious Quran is surfeited with numerous examples of ways that constitute spending wealth for cause of God. For example, chapter 2 verse 177 reads, "The truly good are those who give away some of their wealth, however much they cherish it, to their relatives, to orphans, the needy, travelers and beggars, and to liberate those in bondage." Chapter 2 verse 273 reads, "To those needy who are wholly occupied in God's way and cannot travel in the land. The unknowing might think them rich because of their self-restraint, but you will recognize them by their characteristic of not begging persistently." Chapter 9 verse 60 reads, "Alms are meant only for the poor, the needy, those who administer them, those whose hearts need winning over, to free slaves and help those in debt, for God's cause, and for travelers in need." Similarly, chapter 76 verse 8 reads, "They give food to the poor, the orphan, and the captive, though they love it themselves." To sum up the crux of these verses, wealth may be spent in God's cause in any of the following manner. 1. spending wealth on relatives, orphans, the needy, travelers, and beggars, and to liberate those in bondage. 2. Spending wealth on persons who are wholly occupied in God's cause, in any manner like preaching, praying, etc., who cannot travel, and they also never ask for any financial help. This category does not include professional priests who earn their livelihood from people's wealth under different garb and enjoy a lavish lifestyle. 3. Spending wealth on the poor, the needy, those who administer collection of charity, those whose hearts need winning over, to free slaves and help those in debt, for God's cause and for travelers in need. 4. Feeding the poor, the orphan, and the captive. 5. Spending wealth in any other manner that pleases God, depending upon the circumstances and the good intention of the believer, in the light of wisdom provided by the glorious Koran. Quran is also full of examples that constitute as bad deeds in the sight of God. The merciful nature of God commands that anyone who commits a bad deed will only be repaid with its equivalent and no more, so that he may still have hope of salvation on the judgment day, on the basis of good deeds earned during his life. This fact is confirmed in chapter 6, verse 116, the following words: "But whoever has done a bad deed will be repaid only with its equivalent. They will not be wronged." So a bad deed will only be repaid in its equivalent, unlike a good deed that may be repaid up to 10 times due to the extreme merciful nature of God. This mercy of God is a great blessing for the sinful mankind. The bad deeds have been mentioned in numerous verses of the glorious Quran for the guidance of mankind. The following are some of the examples of bad deeds or sins mentioned in the Quran. 1. Hoarding wealth. 2. Committing adultery. 3. Backbiting. 4. Pork eating. 5. Giving short measure. 6. Boasting. 7. Miserly behavior. 8. Greed, etc. The only worst deed mentioned in the glorious Quran is polytheism. This is also the only unpardonable sin in the sight of God. Chapter 4, verse 48 of Quran confirms it in the following words: "God does not forgive the joining of partners with Him. Anything less than that He forgives to whoever He will. But anyone who joins partners with God has concocted a tremendous sin." On another occasion, chapter 4, verse 116 reiterates this fact in the following words: "God does not forgive the worship of others beside Him, though He does forgive whoever He will for lesser sins. For whoever does this has gone far, far astray." These verses prove beyond any doubt that polytheism is the only worst deed mentioned in the Quran. It is also the only unpardonable sin in the sight of God. In spite of this clear warning, unfortunately, majority of human beings from all faiths indulge in this worst sin, either deliberately or at the advice of priest class. There are numerous examples of polytheism that have been mentioned in the glorious Quran for the guidance of prudent mankind. For details, please refer to my monologue on polytheism posted on my YouTube channel. The following is the brief list of some of the polytheistic practices that have been mentioned in the glorious Quran. 1. Taking prophets as interceders and partner gods in any manner. 2. Taking angels and jinn as partner gods. 3. Believing that dead or living men of whatever stature can influence God's decision in any manner as partner gods. 4. Following one's personal passions at the expense of teachings of Quran. 5. Believing that someone other than God has created any of the natural things in the universe. 6. Believing that God is dependent upon any of His creations for anything. 7. believing that God is bound to please and honor any of his creation, etc. Now I summarize the key points of this monologue for reinforcement purpose. 1. The success or failure of a human being on the judgment day is dependent upon his or her deeds in the worldly life. 2. All deeds have been classified into two broad categories by the merciful Creator. These categories include good deeds or virtues and bad deeds or sins. 3. Quran explicitly mentions all good deeds and bad deeds for the guidance of mankind. For equitable dispensation of justice on the judgment day, all the good deeds and bad deeds have been quantified in terms of their consequences. 4. Good deeds have been categorized into more commendable and ordinary good deeds. The reward for all good deeds may be multiple and up to 10 times depending upon the discretion of God. 5. Bad deeds have also been categorized into grave sins and minor sins. The punishment for each sin is restricted to its equivalent only. 6. The sins have also been categorized into pardonable and unpardonable sins. Except polytheism, all other sins may be pardonable at the discretion of God. 7. The most commendable deed in the sight of God is spending wealth in His cause. This may take several forms depending upon the circumstances and intention of the believer. The reward for spending wealth for God's cause is 700 times for each dollar spent. 8. The noblest deed or the best deed of spending money or wealth in God's cause can be performed by both rich and poor persons. God will reward each individual on the basis of the size of his spending vis-a-vis his total wealth. 9. The most heinous sin mentioned in the Quran is polytheism, that is, ascribing partners to God in any manner. This is the only unpardonable sin in the sight of God. So a polytheist, in spite of all his virtues and good deeds, will never find escape from the hellfire. I conclude my monologue on best and worst deed with a prayer that Allah Almighty may bless this effort. Please do subscribe and share my channel for updates. It's absolutely free. Finally, do ask me questions to alleviate your concern about any related issue discussed in this monologue. Post your questions in the comment section on my YouTube channel for a quick reply.